How would you like to shoot your medium format cameras, but get more exposures and have the cost advantage of 35mm film? Well, if you stick around, I will show you exactly how to do that on just about any camera that takes 120 film. So before I go into how exactly you go to adapt 35mm film to work in a medium format 120 camera, let's just talk about why for a second. And there are two reasons. The lesser reason is cost. So if you're already shooting film, you know it's expensive. If you were that concerned about cost, you'd probably be shooting digital, or you wouldn't be in photography in general because it is quite expensive to do. So that's one reason. You get cheaper film, well, somewhat cheaper film, and you get more exposures. This is a Fujica G690. This is a 6x9 medium format camera. And with the method I'm going to show you, you can get up to 14 exposures using this method. And on this Mamiya C220, which is a 6x6 camera, you can get up to maybe 20 exposures. So you do get much more exposures because usually this camera will only get 8 exposures and this one will get 12. So there is an increase there. The second reason is more of an artistic reason. So when you're using 35mm film to shoot on these medium format cameras, one of the main differences is that you're going to effectively get panorama style photos. With the G690, you will get horizontal panos, and on the Mamiya C220, you're going to get vertical panos. Now, of course, you can just flip these cameras, sideways, and you'll get vertical panos on the Fujica or horizontal panos on the Mamiya. And doing the vertical panoramas on this camera wouldn't be that difficult. It's just like pretty much every other camera. On a TLR though, holding the camera sideways and looking sideways through the viewfinder is not ideal. So it's not as beneficial on a camera of this style compared to a camera of this style. So let's talk about real quick your film negative sizes. So your standard 35mm film frame is going to be about this size. It is 24mm tall and 36mm wide. That's your full frame 35mm film. On the Mamiya C220, a 6x6 camera, you are going to get a negative this size, including the sprocket holes, but I'm just going to calculate the usable area here. You will get 24mm tall and 56mm wide. So the aspect ratio of the 6x6 is going to be 2.33 to 1, which is very close to the cinematic aspect ratio of 2.4 to 1. So if you do like that, you could easily just crop this down a little narrower. And then finally, the Fujica 690, which is a 6x9 camera, you'll get a negative this large, of course, including the sprocket holes. And on this, you will get a frame that is 24mm tall and 84mm wide, and that gives you precisely a 3.5 to 1 aspect ratio, which is incredibly wide. I believe the X-Pan is a 3 to 1 aspect ratio, so this is even wider than the X-Pan. And of course, you can crop these a little bit as needed. Most people, I'm going to assume, are going to crop out the sprocket holes, but if you like that artistic style, you can have the sprocket holes exposed as well. So those are the two reasons why you might use this. One is cost and getting more exposures, and two would be the artistic side of getting a slightly different style frame out of it. So now let's talk about how to convert your 35mm cartridge to work in 120 roll film. What you see in front of me here is basically everything you're going to need to convert your 135 film to work in 120 film cameras. There's really only two things you need to do. One of them is even optional, but highly recommended. And that would be creating your own paper leader to go in front of the film for the roll of film. The reason why you want to do this, and why I highly recommend you do this, is because the 120 film format has a fairly long paper leader in the beginning until you get to the film. You do this so you're not wasting film. You can just take your film, just the bare film, and pull it all the way across and get it all taken up on the take-up reel. but you're going to use almost a foot of film before you're actually going to be able to shoot anything with it. And that is a significant waste. So here are the dimensions you need for making your own paper leader. You're going to want to use tabloid size paper. Tabloid size paper is the same as 2 pieces of letter, or 8.5 by 11 put together. So it's 11 inches wide and 17 inches long. And you're going to need about 15 inches worth of it. From the very beginning of the paper leader to the start arrows is about 8 inches. This dimension is variable. You can have it be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. That's not a critical dimension. What is the critical dimension though is from the start arrows to where your film begins. That has to be no more than 7 inches. It can be a little less. If it is, you're just going to eat up a little bit more of your film, but it shouldn't be any longer, because then your start meter, or like your frame counter for frame number 1, is going to have some paper leader on it. It's not going to be a full frame of film. And so you just cut it out to the same width as your 35mm film. First section is 8 inches, then your start arrows. Then from your start arrows, it's 7 inches until you have your film on there. And you're just going to fix your film with just tape. I recommend taping across both sides. That way you know for sure it's going to be firmly affixed, although it doesn't need to be the strongest tape. And when you go to develop it, you're just going to cut it off. Then you might want either scissors or a scalpel or X-Acto knife, and that will help you to cut this accurately, along with a 24-inch ruler is very recommended to help you keep a nice straight line. Additionally, having either your actual 35mm camera, or like this is a non-working Olympus 35 EC. This I just use as a film winder. It's a lot easier to use the film rewind function on one of these cameras than it is to try and, manually wind the film back in. And there is a very specific reason why you're going to need to do that. And that is because once you complete your roll of film and it's all unwound and wound up on the take-up spool, 120 film cameras have no capacity to rewind the film because it is a reel-to-reel system, not a cartridge system. So when you're done shooting your roll of film, you must take the camera into a dark room or put it in a dark bag, open up the back of the camera, take the take-up spool out that's now full of your exposed film, and manually wind it back into the roll. If you're going to send it off to a developing lab, you have no choice. You have to do that step. However, if you develop your film on your own, you could just bring your film into your dark room or dark bag and go directly from that take-up spool onto your developing reel. That is another option. I just think it'd probably be easier to put it back into here than it would be to go from the 120 take-up spool onto a take-up or a film developing reel. So the next thing you need, and this is critical, you need some sort of plastic or metal or some sort of adapters to take up the space for the extra width of the 120 spool. So 120 film was developed in the early 1900s. It's probably 120 years old by now. And the diameter of the spool is 25mm. I don't know if it's by luck or if it was designed this way, but 35mm film is also a 25mm diameter cartridge. So the diameter is perfect. All you need to do is take up that extra width. I designed these in CAD myself, and I printed them on my 3D printer myself, and they just fit on like that. And now this can go into any camera that takes 120 film. It's a pretty simple and elegant solution. If you don't have CAD software, or if you don't have a 3D printer, you can also buy these pre-made online like eBay for like $10. I'm sure you can find them from some other online retailers. The ones you'll see online actually have little clips and it'll clip in. I just decided to keep it simple, and they just easily slot in there. And that's all it takes right there. Paper leader, recommended but optional, and then some spacers to make it the same size as your 120 film. Other than that, let's show you how to load this film. I have 2 examples of 120 film cameras. I have the Fujica G690, as I've mentioned. This will give you one style, and then the TLR will give you a slightly different style. Loading 120 film is pretty much the same on every camera, but I'll give you 2 quick examples. We're going to start with the Mamiya. All you do is press down the lock and then press the top button, and the back will open up. And then you will pull the tab for one of the one of the spindles, which will allow you to put the film in, put the two spacers on, put the cartridge into the slot and lock the spindles down, and then pull out the paper leader and spool it onto the take-up spool just like normal. All right, so now the big one, the G690. So to unlock this camera, there are some little pull tabs on the bottom. Pull it out and then lock it to the side. That will allow you to open up the film back. Then, just like the other one, now I've got to put my spare spindle in here. So that's the take-up side. So on this side, pull the tab and move it over to lock the spindle in the open position. This one has a little better tolerances, or a little looser tolerances on the spindle, so it's easier to get the film in. Pull the paper leader across and then load it onto the take-up reel. And like normal, you just start shooting. The key here is make sure that the paper leader is aligned on the center of your spindle. That way you know it's going to go through the center of your frame. All right, and that's really all it takes to make 35mm film work in your medium format camera. With that, happy shooting, and until next time, see ya.